New Thinking Aloud is presented by the California Institute for Human Science, Mind, Body, Spirit University, a leader in fully accredited in-person and online U.S. college degree programs in the topics we cover here. Visit their website at cihs.edu.
Thinking Aloud. Conversations on the leading edge of knowledge and discovery with psychologist Jeffrey Mishlove.
October 18th, 2024 is a big date in American civic history, not simply because certain governmental agencies are required by law to reveal their decades-old research on UFOs and UAPs, but also because it continues to peel back the veil on shadow agencies that historically have been answerable to no one, not even American presidents. This is as much a constitutional issue as it is about UAP disclosure. My guest today is famed attorney Daniel Sheehan, whose litigation experience reads like a who's who of American legal history, from Watergate to the Pentagon Papers, the Iran-Contra affair, representing Karen Silkwood, the Lakota Tribe at Standing Rock, and defending Harvard psychiatrist John Mack, who dared to counsel those who claimed alien encounters. Danny is the founder of the New Paradigm Institute and is at the forefront of the UAP Disclosure Act of 2023. Danny's actually going to be joining us for a 4-week seminar series, The Evolution of Religion and Spirituality, One Step Beyond. He'll join Leslie Kean and James Tunney and Alan Cohen later this year. You can go to ChristopherNaughton.com. He joins us today from Santa Cruz, California. So, Danny, welcome back to New Thinking Aloud. It's great to have you here. And before we get to the UAP Disclosure Act and why October 18th is such an important date, October 18th, 2024, before we get into the constitutional context, for some of those who are watching today and don't know who you are, may not be that familiar with your background, how is it that a constitutional attorney who's handled some of the biggest cases in U.S. legal history gets tied into UFOs and UAPs?
Well, the way that this happened, Chris, is that I was at Jesuit headquarters in 1976 when President Carter was elected. And one of the first things that he did, because he had seen a UFO when he was governor of Georgia, one of the first things he did when he was elected president is he contacted the head of the Central Intelligence Agency and demanded that he come down to Plains, Georgia, where Carter was even before he'd come to Washington, and demanded that he be briefed in on the UFO issue. And the head of the CIA at that time was George H.W. Bush, had been appointed by, after Nixon had left, he'd been appointed by Gerald Ford to take over the CIA. And he refused to brief Carter on the UFO issue, saying that Carter had no need to know. So President Carter contacted Congress and asked Congress to conduct an investigation to determine what information our government had about the UFO issue and the related issue of extraterrestrial intelligence. And I was contacted by the Congressional Research Service and asked if I would help as legal counsel over at the Jesuit headquarters in their social ministry office, whether I would assist them in getting access to the Vatican archives and what information might be there. And it was in that context that I was asked to become special counsel to the study that was being done by the Congressional Research Service. And it was in that context that I was able to get access to the classified portions of Project Blue Book. And it was there.
And why you, Danny? Because why you?
Yes.
Because of your connections to the Jesuits and ultimately the Vatican, because they have records of this phenomena as well.
Well, it was suspected. It was suspected, not unreasonably, by Congress, that they believed that the Vatican had information about this. And so the head of the Congressional Research Service, Science and Technology Division, asked me to contact the Vatican and see if I could get access to the Vatican archives about this issue. And it was in that context that I was given access to the classified portions of Project Blue Book. And it was there that I saw the actual official photographs of the crash retrieval activity of the United States government, and saw that, could see clearly that this was a UFO, that was not some craft that the United States had, and I could tell from the symbols that were on the craft, in the kind of lettering that was on the craft, that it was not Russian or Chinese or anything like that. And so I then knew that they had it, so that's how I got involved. I had come to the Jesuit headquarters after graduating from Harvard College and Harvard Law School, and was out practicing law for a number of years. But I had gone back to the Harvard Divinity School to study the ethics of different worldviews that I'd run into out in the outside world, and was doing my master's and PhD work there. And it was there that I got recruited by the Jesuit order to become their legal counsel in their new social ministry office.
All right, so that's how you're introduced, and I know, and we said at the intro, a few years later, a number of years later, actually some 20 odd years later, you're also one of the attorneys who represents John Mack, who's a psychiatrist at Harvard, at Harvard's,
Yes.
I guess, Department of Psychiatry.
Yeah,
he's called on the carpet.
I was his lead attorney.
Lead counsel. And they wanted to get rid of him because he dared to speak to people who claimed to have had alien abduction experiences and UFO experience as well.
Well, it was specifically because he published a book about it. That was what they got so upset about. That he published a book and he was being publicly associated with Harvard University, and they were taking some umbrage at that. And so he asked me to be his lead attorney. He asked me to be his attorney. I brought on a local counsel because I was admitted in New York, in the Southern District of New York and in Washington, D.C., but I was not admitted in Massachusetts. So I had to have a local counsel. And it was that local counsel that kept on insisting upon trying to settle the case. I was totally devoted to bringing on witnesses and showing, what the information was that we had that supported what he was saying and doing. And so that there was a little bit of a tug of war there between, taking advantage of the fact that they had demanded information about this on the one hand, and just the effort to kind of get it settled and dismissed so they'd leave him alone. So that was kind of an interesting.
So aside from the fact that you've got this constitutional background and a lot of civil rights litigation, you also now come forward with a lot of experience when it came to litigation and legal matters regarding UFO, UAP, etc. And then years later, of course, you create the Christic Institute, the Romero Institute. You now have the New Paradigm Institute, which is really dedicated to disclosure. Before we get to that, I just have one aside, since you mentioned there was George H.W. Bush, who would later become president, who told Jimmy Carter, no, you don't have a right to know this. It's a need to know basis. And we're going to talk about the national security state. But isn't it interesting? He becomes Ronald Reagan's vice president. And Reagan also had not one, but two UFO experiences. You have to wonder, maybe whether Bush said, I'll tell you what, Ronnie, since I'm your VP, I'll let you know what we know about UFOs. What's your best guess there?
I'm sure that Bush did not brief Reagan on that because that administration, to be clear, was actually run by George Bush. I mean, Ronald Reagan was viewed as kind of a public face, a guy that would cut ribbons and go places, but the policies of that entire 2 terms of that administration were all basically run by George H.W. Bush. Out of his position as vice president, he'd been the former CIA director, and he had been the ambassador to China. He was vastly more qualified, in everybody's eyes, to actually be president than Reagan was. And of course, then he went on to become president. But at that particular time, he was not disposed to informing Carter about the UFO issue, and I'm sure he did not brief Reagan.
Well, I want to talk a little bit more about the constitutional context and why this is so important and why this is such an integral part of the constitutional crisis that I believe, I'm sure you do believe, that we are experiencing right now. But before we do that, let's talk a little bit about the UAP Disclosure Act, because this October 18th date is coming and it's coming soon. It's a big date. I know you didn't get everything you wanted, or those who want disclosure didn't get everything they wanted, but it's still something. So tell us a little bit about that. Inform the audience why October 18th is such a big date.
Well, the both the Senate and the House passed at least a 24-page version of the law, which mandated that all 6 of the United States military services, all 18 of the United States intelligence agencies, and all 32 of the United States Defense Department agencies all immediately begin the process immediately upon the passage of the act, which took place on December 22nd of 2023, that they were mandated to start gathering together every single document, every single piece of information they had, every single phone call, every single memo, every single piece of material, anything they had pertaining to the UFO issue, in the issue of extraterrestrial life. They were ordered by Congress, both the House and the Senate, and passed into law and signed by President Biden, were commanded to gather all of that information together and have it in digital form with a searchable index and have it prepared by 300 days after the passage of the act on December 22nd of 2023. That date happens to fall on October 18th. Of 2024. And that is the date on which they are mandated to gather all of that information together and to make it available. The Senate law said make it available immediately to the National Archives. The law that was passed by the House said make it available as soon as possible thereafter. Now, lawyers, our hair stood on end. To the extent to which I'm able to do that, that there are with everybody got freaked out. The lawyers say, "Wait a second, giving those agencies who actively not only concealed this information for 80 years, but have actively lied to Congress repeatedly to pretend they don't have it, to allow them to say how soon is it going to be possible for us to get this to you, was a big loophole." Because the Senate statute had ordered them to produce it immediately. Okay, so that we've still got that issue to have to deal with, and we're addressing that with additional legislation that we're trying to get passed now. But the bottom line is that date is still there. It's the deadline by means of which it had to be all gathered together and put into digital format with a searchable index and be ready to be presented to the National Archives, which of course would then put it to make it available to the Senate and House Intelligence Committee, which have the adequate security clearances to review that material.
And again, because we've had whistleblowers come forward, and obviously you've been privy to a lot of information, much of which you can't speak about, but the record seems to suggest, not more than suggest, they have the technology, they have biology, and that even some of the technology may be operational. Comment to the degree you can, Danny.
Well, yes, that is clear. The Senate Intelligence Committee has now secured the testimony under oath of over 40 people who were directly involved in the reverse engineering program and in the crash retrieval program, and so they know that that's true. They've cleared David Grush to testify publicly in Congress. Made available to the public, his testimony that we were in possession of more than one, extraterrestrial, non-human origin spacecraft, and the biological evidence establishing that the occupants of the craft were non-human. Okay, that testimony has now been provided in Congress, and very importantly, has been pre-cleared by the United States Defense Department Office of Pre-Publication Review in Security. So that information has now been made public. But of course now they're trying to assert that, well, maybe they haven't really effectively been able to develop any of that technology. That's information that has not yet been publicly released. That they've been able to figure out some of the technology in this. That two of the craft, when I said earlier, the two of the craft that they recovered were fully functional. That doesn't mean that they know how to fly them. Those craft, they appear to be navigated telepathically.
In fact,
it's hard to, it's indicative of what we know about it, that they haven't been able to figure out how to fly them, but that they're trying to punch through the technology and see if they can at least work off some kind of effort to provide some added ability to make a weapon system, which is what their primary objective is. That entire program was hidden inside an unacknowledged special access program that was basically known as OSAP, which is the Advanced Weapons Special Access Program inside the Pentagon. So you could tell they were trying to develop weapons by getting at this technology.
Do you really believe, Danny, that when this October 18th date comes down, and again, since a lot of the teeth of the original Senate bill has been removed, again, the House Republicans kind of denuded it in some ways, neutered it in some ways, not entirely, of course. But it sounds interesting that you're telling me that the Department of Defense, CIA, and other national security state agencies are more willing to let this information out. Is it because they know the gig is up, or is this part of a long game that they're playing?
Well, this is kind of surmise. It has to be made based on what we know. But the fact of the matter is, we know that they have been engaged in this long time program of leaking information periodically about the reality of the UFO phenomenon. I mean, to the point where almost any fifth grader in the country that you ask to draw a picture of an ET, and they'll draw a picture of it for you, And if you ask them to point out what a UFO looks like, they'll draw one for you, I mean, so it's clear that the national security state people have been engaged for some time in kind of leaking out pieces of information about this. There is this long, protracted program, but it's quite clear that at least since December of 2017, when Lou Elizondo and Chris Mellon came forward and brought the videos of the Tic Tac stuff and the Go Fast in the gimbal, that since that point in time, there's been this accelerated process pursuant to which information is being made more public, which includes the testimony of David Grush, includes a lot of the kind of public statements that have been made by both Lou Elizondo and Chris Mellon, and a major number of inside people who come forward and provided sworn testimony to the Senate Intelligence Committee. So
is it because they know that this information is getting out anyway, that it's time to release this slowly but surely? What is the ultimate goal here, since they can't seem to keep a lid on it anymore? Is the long game, well, we're going to release this information slowly and make sure that we can still control the narrative to our own means, even if that means giving technology to our friends in private industry and fashioning weapons so that we can fight this threat?
Well, this is the area that's still subject to speculation.
Right.
We don't have a lot of the publicly available information, at least, on what's going on here. I'm not at liberty to speculate on some of it because I'm in possession of additional information. But the bottom line is that I can tell you my opinion, and that I believe that there has been some sort of a decision made at some level inside the national security state bureaucracy to release more of this information. And that's now coming out authorized to be revealed publicly, which includes virtually all the new information that we've been given by Lou Elizondo and Chris Mellon and David Grush, et cetera. And the very interesting thing, the United States Defense Department Office of Pre-Publication Review is authorizing the release of that information. So that technically those people are not whistleblowers. That they haven't basically challenged the national security oaths that they've taken. They haven't violated any non-disclosure agreements that they've entered into. They haven't been. They're not like Daniel Ellsberg or Snowden, or these people. They're not breaching their security clearances at all yet.
Well, not now. They're not. Right.
They're not. They're not. And so the question then is that, but they've now stimulated Congress. Congress is going forward and making demands against the national security state that go beyond what it is that these people who've been authorized by the Defense Department and the intelligence agencies to come forward, the Congress is now demanding more, because that's embarrassed the Congress, actually. That now it's clear that they've been being lied to for 80 years. They've been telling their constituents there's no such thing. There's nothing to be worried about. There's no there, because the Congress has been relying upon the national executive branch to brief them on what's going on. And so they've been conveying that same message to their constituents. And now they've been caught, misrepresenting the facts. And so now that they've turned on the executive branch and demanded that they be given more information. Now, they haven't decided how much of it they're going to make public, except the United States Senate. Very importantly, the United States Senate, in the bill that it passed, a 64-page bill, which they passed virtually unanimously. It passed unanimously through the Intelligence Committee, 17-0, with the extreme conservative Republican senators and even very progressive Democratic senators. But it passed the whole United States Senate virtually unanimously. And what they've mandated is that everything older than 25 years, any information or materials that have been obtained prior to 25 years ago, has to be released immediately to the public. Now, that's an extraordinarily aggressive stand that's been taken by the Senate. Okay, now that got taken out of there. That got taken out of there by the House. Because they want the people who are in charge of the military services, Defense Department agencies, and intelligence agencies. They want them to be the ones who decide what, if anything, is going to be released to the public. We know what their position is, like zero. They're still pretending that it doesn't even exist. You can see that from the Arrow report. So the bottom line is that there is a dynamic underway right now in which there are subgroups and factions that are operational, both inside Congress and inside the national security state apparatus that have differing positions on this. But it's clear that some collective development has occurred here, which is proposing releasing new information to the public about this in some sort of a controlled manner. And the controlled manner is pretty well described in the Senate bill. What they're proposing is a step-by-step process over a period of 7 years, which they intended to start back in December of 2023, to have this extend over this period of time up to 2030, basically.
But again, that's the Senate bill you're referring to, and again, that's not the one that ultimately passed. But it may come back up again. It's a lot of fun going out on the thin, skinny branches when you're talking to an acclaimed constitutional attorney, because it gives the conversation gravitas. I mean, for many years myself, I was not that engaged, even though I spoke of holistic and spiritual matters in my radio programming. But even being an attorney, it wasn't as if I was that engaged with the UFO UAP phenomena. Now I find out, after listening to people such as you, that it really triggers my ire, my constitutional ire, because we're getting a much larger picture, despite the fascination about UFO and UAP and bright, shiny objects. It really is a much deeper story about the violations of our constitutional rights in this nation. And I believe that this coming forward is a much bigger civics and constitutional story than maybe even UFOs and UAPs themselves.
That's absolutely true. That's absolutely true, Chris. What this represents is the kind of penultimate demonstration of the excesses of the national security state apparatus that has been created as of the National Security Act of 1947. There were all kinds of people that were raising fundamental questions about passing that act and setting up a national security state infrastructure that was authorized to engage in espionage and outside of the country engaging in criminal acts that would actually entail overthrowing elected governments, in democratic societies, and even assassinating other people, and that people were warning that if you allow such an infrastructure to get set up, a kind of national security state police operation going on, that will inevitably bleed back into the country.
Which you learned firsthand. You learned that firsthand, Danny. Sorry to interrupt, but you learned that firsthand when you litigated the Iran-Contra matter.
Oh, that's right. No, that was the previous immediate demonstration of the lengths to which that national security state would go in openly defying Congress when Congress explicitly ordered them not to provide any kind of military assistance, either direct or indirect, to the Contras, which were the fascist government military forces down in Nicaragua that had been ousted by a popular revolution that threw them out. And the Congress realized that the CIA and the Joint Special Operations Command of the Pentagon and others who had developed an extremely right-wing kind of position of supporting fascist governments all through Central America and Latin America, in El Salvador, in Argentina, and other
Chile.
Places, that Congress suspected that they would try to go ahead and fund the government, even though it was ousted, the fascist government. And so they passed the Boland Amendment, explicitly prohibiting them from giving any aid. And what happened is the Central Intelligence Agency and elements inside the United States Pentagon, decided to undertake a covert operation to provide the military equipment and lie to Congress about it, and even go to the lengths of smuggling drugs, cocaine, into the United States in massive quantities on the same planes that they were using to secretly fly the weapons down in order to raise money, because they didn't want to have to go to Congress and try to fund the operation that they were engaged in. And Oliver North, in conversations directly with him, actually said to me, look, Dan, that the Congress of the United States may have the power of the purse strings and are the ones that can authorize official government spending. But if we can go get money somewhere else, like from the Shah of Iran or from the Prince of Istanbul somewhere, we can do anything we want. We have the authority to engage in whatever kind of foreign policy activity we wish to do. I mean, it was just openly, flagrantly defying the authority of Congress to regulate the conduct of the executive branch. And so that we see this happening now, and it's risen to the point where they not only believe that they are authorized to engage in these covert operations and conceal them from Congress, but that they're authorized to lie to Congress and even assert that they're not doing it.
And going back to JFK, I know I asked this question when we did a live stream with Jeffrey Mishlove and Emmy Vadnais on New Thinking Aloud. I asked you about, the JFK assassination. I know you've taught courses on that in the collegiate and the university levels on that. We won't go too far down that rabbit hole today. However, I think it is emblematic of part of the, the deep constitutional violations after the Bay of Pigs and the October missile crisis. JFK said he wanted to smash the CIA into 1,000 pieces. They sure as hell weren't going to let that happen. And, their fingerprints are probably all over his assassination. But, there are things that ring around the internet. Probably a lot of it is fake news, but whether it is true or not, and I've got a document up on the page on our screen right now of a purported memorandum where JFK was asking the national security state for all the information on UFOs. Now, this may be a fake. However, it's not that big a stretch.
There's no doubt about that.
He did.
It was June 5th of 1963. He specifically asked the Central Intelligence Agency to give him the information about the UFO stuff. That's established fact. That's true.
That's established fact. And again,
Yes.
as you said before, that may or may not have contributed to his assassination, but isn't it emblematic of someone in the executive branch attempting to safeguard democracy and transparency for the American people?
Yes. No, well, actually, what happened specifically in that case is that Kennedy was planning to give the information to Khrushchev. And because he was so upset over the fact that that the whole world had come to the very brink of total thermonuclear annihilation in the Cuban Missile Crisis, that he had reached out to Khrushchev, and they were actually exchanging private letters outside of the chain of command, outside of the State Department, outside of the CIA. They had exchanged 18 different sets of letters that were being shipped back and forth between Khrushchev and Kennedy, and pursuant to which they were planning to each respectively exercise their executive power to start disassembling the nuclear warheads of both countries. And that's what got him killed. And in this context, he was trying to demonstrate to Khrushchev the good faith of his being willing to engage in that kind of détente with the Soviet Union. He was going to provide to them whatever we knew about UFOs, because he wanted to engage in a joint space program with the Soviet Union as a mechanism for overcoming our dialectical, antagonistic relationship. That's what, and so that was, so in a certain sense, very tangentially, his request for the UFO information played a role in the assassination, but very tangential. It was just one more example, though a lesser example, of the lengths to which he was willing to go to try to establish peace with the Soviet Union for the future. But the actual steps of him planning to take steps to order the disassembling of the nuclear warheads of our arsenal is what caused him to kill it.
So this entire legacy, Daniel, of ultimate secrecy and often saying, well, it's national security. We can't let you know these things because we can't let our enemies know. We can't let you know about UFOs and UAPs because you can't handle the truth. And yet now we're seeing that over 80 years of what are just more or less bald-faced lies and often employing the excuse that it's for national security. Really, it's far more than that. It's for need to know basis. It's for greed. It's for power. It's for money flowing into the military industrial complex that Dwight D. Eisenhower warned us about on the very last day of his presidency. And this is continuing until today. I mean, is this maybe a keynote that perhaps we're starting to see this fissure or cracking between the national security state and the American people? Because right now, as I look at it, doesn't matter if you're red or blue, this issue is crossing all political lines. People are fed up.
Well, we'll see. We'll see, Chris, how far this can be taken here. I do believe that we have the most broad-based coalition of people all across the political spectrum, all ideologies, all political parties, all social classes and racial classes. All of these people, all the vast overwhelming majority of our people demand to know what it is our government knows about the UFO phenomenon and about any extraterrestrial civilization that exists. We're being treated like we're natives on some tiny island in the Pacific that doesn't know about the existence of the whole rest of the world going on, and their leaders don't want them to know that there's this whole world going on off island, and that's what's happening here. And so that I think that if we conduct ourselves carefully enough and responsibly enough here, we can mobilize the vast majority of people in the country to make Congress, exercise its constitutional responsibility to assert oversight over the executive branch, which it has not been doing in this particular field, and more generally, allowing the national security state covert operations to run roughshod, and it's now resulted in them actually ousting members of the Senate. They clearly ousted Frank Church after he chaired the Select Committee on Intelligence Abuse. They poured millions of dollars into his Senate race in Idaho, in 1980 and ousted him by publicly revealing the fact that he supported the Equal Rights Amendment for women, and that he supported some moderate gun control. And they put millions of dollars into that campaign. It was all choreographed by Theodore Shackley, who was the director of covert operations for the CIA under George H.W. Bush. This guy Shackley was brought in to the campaign under Vice President Bush in the Reagan administration. And then that's what he was doing, even though he was retired. He's the one that actually created the off-the-shelf enterprise that was the subject matter of the Iran-Contra. It wasn't Oliver North. It was this guy, Theodore Shackley. And he worked directly with George Bush Sr., and that he was his dark law, operant. That's who he was. And he was responsible for a massive political assassination program in Southeast Asia that killed over 20,000 complete non-combatant civilians, teachers and town mayors and stuff that weren't adequately loyal to the right-wing South Vietnamese government. He shipped in, thousands of tons, over time of heroin into the United States coming out of Southeast Asia. That's the lengths that we're talking about, that the national security state has gone to facilitate the influx of those kind of drugs, heroin and cocaine, into the United States, to be responsible for the massive addiction that we see going on in the country now. And so the time has come now, since we have such a broad-based constituency demanding the information about the UFOs and the extraterrestrial civilization that they represent, that we may be able to carefully, step by step, bring about the reining in of this national security state on the part of Congress.
You use national security state and deep state sometimes interchangeably. And as we know, one political figure claims to be a victim of the so-called deep state. But how would you differentiate between the two?
Well, what Trump is really talking about is the bureaucracy. There's a bureaucracy of tens of thousands of federal government employees in the dozens of major federal agencies who are there. They're civil servants, and they're there all the time, and they're engaged in policies and principles and programs that they have ended up supporting. And any president comes into power and tries to change things, there's a resistance. There's kind of a lethargy. There's a resistance. There's an inertia on the part of the bureaucracy to resist change. That's one thing. And that's what Trump is talking about. Trump is talking about this deep state, the FBI, even the intelligence agencies, but lots of the people in the environmental protection agencies, the transportation departments, all these. That's what Trump is talking about. What we're talking about when we're talking about the national security state, we're talking about the apparatus that has been set up primarily pursuant to the National Defense, to the National Intelligence Act that was passed in 1947. Okay, the National Security Act was passed, and it set up the Central Intelligence Agency. Later on, it set up the Defense Intelligence Agency, the NSA, the National Security Agency. And there are now 18 different intelligence agencies that are functioning inside the United States. And the fact of the matter is that they are now starting to engage in the same kind of activities that the CIA was authorized to engage in internationally. They're doing it domestically against our own elected officials. It was not only Frank Church, but it was Dick Clark in Iowa. The senator from Iowa was unseated. The senator from Indiana, Birch Bayh, was ousted from power by the Central Intelligence Agency, covertly funding money into their campaigns. Obviously that Jimmy Carter was actually the target of a major campaign to secretly hold the hostages, the 52 hostages that have been taken by the Hezbollah in Iran. All of that was supervised under the auspices, a lot of George H.W. Bush as the former director of the Central Intelligence Agency, and Allen Dulles, legal counsel for the CIA. Yeah. And people know about that. The people in Congress know about that, and they're intimidated. They're frightened about it. And what we need to do is we need to, as citizens, rise up and organize and give the kind of protection to the people in Congress that is necessary for them to start to disassemble these excesses of the national security state. That's
But you can understand, Danny, why Trump has been able to why Trump has been able to tap into some of that ire. Some things we either know legitimately or intuitively, let's say, whatever it is, there is a greater and greater mistrust of the so-called national security state. Again, from Iran-Contra to JFK assassination to UFO, UAP, and we could probably you've named several already. You can at least understand, even if you don't believe that Donald Trump is the right man for the White House, you can understand the appeal of wanting to pull back the curtain.
That's right. No, and he's very craftily kind of taken advantage of some of that, just like he's taken advantage of the ire that a lot of the people have over the shipping of jobs overseas to China, et cetera, and they've decimated the kind of hometown mom and pop stores and stuff all through the Midwest. That he's taking advantage of those kind of points of distress on the part of the people. But this issue with the national security state thing is something that is a profound constitutional issue. The Congress of the United States has been put in place by the founders to regulate the conduct of the executive branch, that is the kings and the authorities in the executive branch, and to allow the executive branch to develop this kind of demanded autonomy from congressional oversight to the point where they not only refuse to brief them, but they lie to them and deny the existence of programs and go outside, not only seeking foreign power to invest in our own independent foreign policy for the national security state, but also to engage in selling drugs, heroin and cocaine. And the people get shocked when they think that anybody's going to accuse them of doing something like that. But it's the record is replete with proof that that's what they've been engaged in, And so that the time has come now for the American people to mobilize around this particular issue, having to do with the demand for knowledge about what our government knows about the UFO phenomenon and the extraterrestrial civilization that surrounds it. That we've got to mobilize that power and to have to set up institutional responses to deconstructing some of those most excessive structures that they've set up inside the national security state, to roll them back. That's what we need to do now.
Well, people that you've represented, from Elizondo to Stephen Greer, I know Stephen Greer is really big on the notion that, hey, we know that there are UFOs and UAPs. We know that there are other types of consciousness that may actually be, native to our planet. These orbs that Chris Bledsoe has talked about on Beyond Skinwalker Ranch and Ancient Aliens. All those programs I never used to be interested in, and now I'm seeing it as part as an overall continuum, especially with its constitutional implications. But now that these things are being unearthed and they are coming forward, what we are also finding is that this information, the technology, is not only being kept from the American public, it's being siphoned off and passed off to private industries in the military-industrial complex so that they can reverse engineer it. And Stephen Greer would tell you, and they want to do one thing. They want to use it for weapons, because as opposed to some grassroots groups that believe that trying to contact extraterrestrial life in a way of opening ourselves up to a greater extraterrestrial civilization, we're being told by those who are getting this technology, be afraid, be very afraid.
Yes. No, that much of what Stephen Greer says is true. That's right. And it is true. I mean, based on my knowledge over 50 years now of dealing with things from Pentagon Papers to the Iran-Contra scandal to the Kennedy assassination, everything else that I've been directly involved in studying and researching as an attorney with professional investigators. That I don't believe, even though the government, these national security state people, are perfectly capable of exploring a war game scenario pursuant to which they might conceivably be interested in using whatever technologies they may have developed from the crash retrievals into pretending that we're being attacked by an extraterrestrial civilization, so as to maximize their access to funding from Congress for military development. That just because they're perfectly capable of doing something like that and contemplating doesn't mean they're going to do it. And I fully respect, Stephen's, desire to warn people about it, to put people on guard against it. But that's different than saying that he has information that they're going to do it.
Understood. And one can understand why you'd be skeptical also, because apparently some of these weapon systems I've heard you talk about trying to use the technology garnered from the crash sites or the crashed product, if you will, are being used for nuclear weapons that could reach Russia or China in 2 minutes.
Yeah. No, that's true. No, there's every reason. There's every reason to be assertive about trying to roll back the illegalities of the national security state. And in fact, that Stephen, for example, argues that you might err on the side of caution and actually be willing to assert to people that you have information indicating that they're planning to do it. I don't think that that's a wise thing to do. I don't think that one should pretend that one has got definite information that they're going to do something and mislead the American people based on fear. But I do think it's an intelligent thing to warn people about the fact that they're perfectly capable of being willing to do something like that because of the development of the national security state. This developed and the kind of tactics that they engage in outside the country. And it's perfectly logical to think that they might be willing to turn those tools against the American public because they have done so. And that the people in Congress are perfectly cognizant of the fact that they're capable of turning those weapons against them. For example, when Senator Durenberg, who was the Republican senator from Minnesota, actually got up on the floor of the Senate and demanded an investigation of the off-the-shelf enterprise early on in this stage. Three Spanish-speaking guys showed up at his home and dragged his wife out of bed and put a gun in her mouth and threatened to kill her and the whole family if he didn't get up on the floor of the Senate and withdraw his request for that investigation. I mean, and those are not people who just came in off the street. Those are people from the national security state. Those are people from the infrastructure that's been set up to authorize things like that being done outside of our country. And that is absolutely unacceptable, and we cannot have an operation like that going on in our constitutional democracy. This is a very, very, very dangerous moment that we're in here. A very dangerous moment. And what we want to be able to do in mobilizing the people that are demanding access to this information about UFOs is to help educate people as to the existence of this national security state and use this as an example of the excesses to which they have gone so that we can attempt to mobilize that kind of groundswell of citizen support for rolling back some of these excesses of this national security state, especially in light of this latest ruling of the Supreme Court, in which, a president such as Donald Trump, if he were to be elected, would push to the very boundaries, whatever power he thought he had a right to exercise, in hopes that the Supreme Court would allow that, and protect him against any criminal prosecution. So we need to understand that we have crossed into a very dangerous period here, so long as that precedent remains in effect, until we can get it overruled and set aside. Just like we need to eventually get overruled the assertion on the part of this Supreme Court that corporations are people and that they're entitled to First Amendment rights, that they can give as much money as they want to elected representatives to get them elected. That's poisoning the very roots of our whole democratic system. This particular majority of this Supreme Court. But we have to take, careful measures. We're not talking about, any kind of armed insurrection against even an unjust government. We're not supporting anything like that. What we need to do is do our job as citizens. It's a lot more than just being like a couch potato that sits on the couch and watches all this stuff going on, on the television like you're some spectator. You people have got to get involved. That's why we're asking them to contact us, for example, at newparadigminstitute.org, and learn all about this, get the information so you can discuss it with your friends and neighbors and family members, and develop an intelligent position on this, and understand how you reach out to your congresspeople, and your senators, to get them to stand up on their hind legs and challenge the national security state pursuant to their constitutional obligation to do so. That's what we're in the process of doing now. So all people need to do is contact us, go on the internet and go to newparadigminstitute.org and let us know your name and your zip code, so that we'll then immediately communicate to you who your Congress member is. And you know who your two senators are usually, but you'll know exactly who your congressperson is, and that it will send automatically a communication to your congressperson and your senators, letting them know that you're in favor of transparency and disclosure with regard to the UFO issue. And then
once again, it's always a grassroots movement. It's never going to come from the top down, and that's why you say on your new paradigm.org site, we need to push back. We need to use the democratic institutions to assert our right to know what this information is, what this quote unquote extraterrestrial civilization is all about, and what is their agenda. Extraterrestrial civilization. Talk about that a little bit, Danny. It sounds a little Star Trek-y.
Well, I mean, that's the reason Star Trek is as popular as it is, because people suspect this is true, based on reason. Until 20 years ago, the scientific community wouldn't even acknowledge that there were any other planets outside of our solar system, because they were attached to this scientific, logical, positivist, strictly materialist worldview. That unless and until you could see it and touch it and taste it and weigh it and measure it, it didn't exist. But that our human family has realized forever that there's almost certainly life elsewhere in the universe, and now we know that the planets that are being discovered, the exoplanets, hundreds and hundreds of them, most of which within their temperate zones of their planet, so their so-called Goldilocks zones, are potentially capable of sustaining life, and over periods of millions of years, evolving into intelligent life, and over another at least thousands of years, developing into highly technologically developed intelligent life, have figured out how to engage in superluminal flight, and to defy the boundaries of gravity from their planets and to travel into the stars. And that intergalactic, at least intergalactic operation that's going on now, is obviously present out beyond our solar system. And there's every indication now, the evidence is becoming growingly overwhelming, that they are visiting our planet, and that they it's not entirely clear what their full agenda is, but it's absolutely, what is absolutely clear is, number one, that they're coming here. Number two, that they're engaged in exploring our planet, that they're engaged in taking specimens, different types of flora and fauna from our planet to examine what life forms are here on our planet. They are obviously abducting individual human beings and subjecting us to involuntary physical examinations, as though we were animals in the jungle, like we do, like our human species does, with regard to lions and tigers and bears, and even chimpanzees and more highly developed, apes that are acknowledged by our own scientific community to be, ancestors to ourselves in an evolutionary chain. Now that we do that kind of thing, so it's clear they're doing that kind of thing with regard to our human family. It is also evident that they're engaged in some sort of hybrid program of actually gene splicing some of our genetic material and their genetic material to try to generate some sort of a hybrid race. Those things are true. Those things are true. But it's also true, extraordinarily important to be clear, that they're not publicly immediately revealing themselves. They're not landing on the White House lawn and saying, here we are. They're not landing even in Central Park in New York and saying, here we are. That but
that would not be the point, right? That's not the point.
No, that's not the point. But the bottom line is, what they're flying around now in a lot larger numbers, and they're being photographed and they're being videoed, and they're actually presenting themselves right in the flight paths of F-18 Super Hornet jet fighters, which they know are taking pictures of them, and they know that they're videoing them and they're making it public now. So it's not as though they're concealing completely their existence. But they're concealing their agenda. They're concealing, what other programs are going on their part. And they're concealing very importantly, what level of communication they may have with the people in our national security state. There may be some sort of lines of communication going on, but to have the people that are in our national security state, whom even we don't trust, to be engaged in representing us in the communications with an extraterrestrial civilization and formulating the protocols pursuant to which we'll have a relationship with them that is going to go on for the next 10,000 years is completely inappropriate. It is inappropriate to have a warrior class of our people, engaging in figuring out what our relationship is going to be with these people. It's the old saying, when you think like a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Or, when a pickpocket meets a saint, all he sees are his pockets. You can't have the national security state apparatus be responsible for formulating our relationship with an extraterrestrial civilization. That is completely inappropriate under our constitutional form of government. The executive branch might wish to propose some kind of special relationship, but by our Constitution, it has to present that proposal to the United States Senate. And until such time as 2/3 of the United States Senate ratify any such agreement, it has no effect whatsoever. And just as a matter of being constitutional,
do you think that, certainly we started seeing much more of this at the time of Roswell, right after the Second World War, right after the release of 2 atom bombs in Japan, and then the proliferation. And of course, the stories are known by most lay people of UFOs and UAPs flying near or around or about various military facilities and installations and nuclear installation facilities. Do you think that there's anything commensurate that's going on today, the uber polarization that we're seeing, not only in our country, but really around the world, autocracy, climate change? Do you think, this is just a pure guess on our parts, do you think this has anything to do with contributing to the plethora and the increase in visitations, in sightings, not to mention, cameras that we carry in our pockets every day, capturing this information or this phenomena? Do you think that the times we're in, the polarization of the times we're in, are leading to greater visitations, if you will?
Well, I think that very, very clearly that we have hundreds of examples of individuals whom I've spoken with, many of, who have very, very, very credible accounts of having had direct face-to-face encounters with the occupants of these UFO vehicles. And a substantial portion of these people report very credibly that they're telepathically being told by these beings that we need to get rid of the nuclear weapons on our planet, that this is threatening the total destruction of the capacity of our planet to gestate life. That we believe scientifically that we as a species have been gestated by our planet. out of the chemical processes and biological processes that go on our planet, that it has given rise to the early single cell life forms that have evolved teleologically on up through the different species up to the human species now here on our planet. So we scientifically believe that to be true. And therefore, these beings are warning us that, look, you are in danger of terminating the life-generating capacity of your planet if you have a massive thermonuclear war. They have also been warning us that we have to stop, quote, contaminating our planet by pouring all of these kind of chemicals and stuff into the atmosphere and into the rivers and oceans of our planet. That we're contaminating our planet, again, threatening to totally disrupt the organic climatic system of our planet that is going to end up potentially needing the termination of our entire species. These are very concrete warnings that have been talked about, for the last, 65 years. People have been talking about these kind of direct encounters with the extraterrestrial beings that are piloting these craft and navigating these craft, and they land on the ground and they have these encounters with human beings. And up until this point, anyone who has been trying to tell people about this going on have been savagely attacked by the national security state people. That they've actually, and we now know this, that Richard Dolan, in his major work on UFOs and the national security state, has released the documents, the internal documents that show that, in fact, this was a pre-planned program on the part of our national security apparatus. The CIA and the parts of the Pentagon have engaged in an active campaign to attack and discredit and portray as ridiculous and even mentally ill anybody who tries to tell you that this is going on. So that we now know that has been part of the big fat lie that has been going on. And yet people who have been trained into believing whatever it is that people in positions of authority tell them, which is an ever decreasing percentage of the population, I might add, they still are caught on this thing of anybody who tries to tell you that UFOs are actually here, or people who are trying to tell you that UFOs have actually landed and have had direct face-to-face communications with other human beings. I've got to have a screw loose, or I got to be possibly mentally ill, and so part of our obligation as citizens, we have to overcome that kind of brainwashing that has gone on the part of our national security state against our own citizens in complete violation of the Constitution. To have the military and the intelligence agencies engaged in warfare against our own citizens, to lie to us and try to browbeat us into believing that anybody who is trying to tell you about the UFO phenomenon is mentally ill or either completely out of touch with reality. This is completely irresponsible, and the time has come now for our citizens to stand up, push back against this, and educate ourselves about what this information really is. And there's a certain percentage of us who have spent over the last 50 years familiarizing ourselves in great detail with what the information is and vetting it to determine what portions of it are true and what portions of it are speculation or are complete fabrication or hoaxing, but we have been able to discern the core of this information through the vetting process. That is exactly what I was brought on to do. I was the legal counsel for the Disclosure Project with Dr. Greer for 20 years. Part of my responsibility was vetting these type of witnesses so that we weren't presenting people who were untrustworthy, or even possibly lying. We've been presenting, for example, that the chief investigator for the Federal Aviation Agency testified, the general officers in the United States military testifying, people who are beyond reproach, people who are trusted with our most guarded secrets, coming forward and telling you that this is true, and so we have started to now successfully overcome the campaign that is being mounted by the national security state people to make you think that all these people are kind of crazy. You know, we've functionally overcome that now. And we've now come to the point of saying, what are we going to do about this? Now that we know that this has been going on, what are we going to do about educating ourselves and taking the steps that are necessary to get our elected representatives to exercise their constitutional responsibility to rein in this national security state and extract from them the information that has been gathered up to this point and make it available to our people, and to present concrete, responsible responses that we might have as a collective community, not only in our nation state, but on our planet, in a cooperative way. Figure out what kind of a treaty we need to have with these beings, and what kind of a treaty we have to have among ourselves, so that we will not allow any of that technology to be used for a new round of major weapons. We have to stop that right now, right here at its initial inception. Those are very concrete things that we need to do. Fortunately, those of us who have been trained to be lawyers and are familiar with the structures of our government and how legislation is written, what the legitimate capacities in Congress are to do something about this, you know, that's what we've gathered together at the New Paradigm Institute. We have over 550 volunteers that are working with us, many of whom are in the academy, in the universities. We have 35 members of the academics for disclosure. We have lawyers. We have a whole team of lawyers, which are not only willing to protect individual whistleblowers and represent them pro bono, but also drafting legislation. You know, we have just drafted a major new, much strengthened UFO witness whistleblower protection statute, you know, which we've now proffered to the Congress. We just sent that in yesterday. The House of Representatives has that before it now. You know, we're sending it to the Senate. I've done that this morning. We've sent it over to the people that are involved in drafting the new Schumer rounds 2.0, you know, for the kind of strengthened language to protect whistleblowers. So we've got that capacity to do this, and we have experience in legislative drafting. You know, we've gotten statutes passed, you know, both on the state and federal level in the past. You know, we know how to do this. And what we're trying to do is bring our citizens together through the New Paradigm Institute in Washington, D.C., to coordinate our citizen response to this information, and to make the information available, the totally credible, solid, vetted information available to the citizens of our country and to the world, and to help organize ourselves in a constitutionally protected way to exercise our democratic rights, to communicate the information to the Congress and get them to do their duty. You know, that's what we're doing.
I was going to say, ultimately, I find that you are probably an optimist, or you believe that we'll make it through there. I couldn't help but notice in the past that you've had, you know, a Neil Howe's book and William Strauss's book, Generations, behind you. And of course, they wrote the book,
That's right.
The Fourth Turning, which we interviewed Neil on this particular channel. And
Yes.
we were unabashed in the fact that history goes through cycles. And, you know, at least once in that 80 to 90 year cycle, there is that critical turning point, that fourth turning, which is existential. But out of that comes something rather amazing. And in American history, and again, the time we're in, if you were to believe Howe and some of the professional astrologers out there, they would tell you we're in the same scheme that we were in at the time of the American Revolution, the Civil War, the opening of the Second World War for us, 1941, and right around the time of the Capitol riot. Here we are again. Are you ultimately optimistic that the American ideals are going to survive this time period, this time of extreme polarization and what appears to be autocracy and fascism on the rise, not just here, but around the world, that somehow, some way, the American ideal gets through all of this?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. You know, because I know history, and I know what's really going on here. I know what the real problems are. And I can, our whole institute has been set up to help educate people, to raise the consciousness of our people, to raise their levels of education and knowledge in this field, and to provide concrete, specific steps that can be taken, you know, given our constitutional liberties that we have in our country, and the understanding of the democratic structures that we have. So that's the whole point of the New Paradigm Institute, that we realize that we're now entering into this extraordinarily new period of realizing that we, like the tiny island people that were in the South Pacific in the 1950s, have suddenly discovered that there's this extraordinarily much larger civilization surrounding us, and we have to learn how to accommodate this. And we don't want to go the way that culture did, of just collapsing in the face of the onslaught of all of this massive new expansive information. We've got to prepare for this, but you can't prepare for it until you start acknowledging that what's going on here, and so that the effort on the part of the national security state to keep this secret has prevented us for 80 years from preparing for this extraordinary period in our human history of the acknowledgement of the existence of this extraterrestrial civilization and our participation in it in a way in which we can preserve our concept of individual human dignity and our rights and privileges as individuals in the face of a collective. We have to be able to deal with this. Those were the excesses that we've seen happen in the Soviet Union, the suppression of those kind of individual liberties. That we've seen what happens in that excess. We've seen what happens now in the excess on our part. Okay, so we now have to strike a better balance here. We have to reach across the ideological lines, across every other kind of divisive line in our human family, and we've got to all come together. We've got to cooperate in a constructive, upward, positive, forward manner to address the encounter we're engaged in now with an extraterrestrial civilization. We have to stop turning on each other and setting up these kind of skirmishes and side arguments with each other, ideological and self-interested. We've got to do that, okay? This is an extraordinary challenge for our human family, and it's one out of which major changes can be brought about in the unjust structures, both on the East and West, that we can increase our religious knowledge, our metaphysical knowledge of the other realms of dimensions of reality that we have available to us. We can start to get disclosure, not only from the governments, but from the religious institutions that have been suppressing the fact that our human family is capable, our human species is capable of much more extraordinary things that they seem to attribute only to kind of unique individuals, like that are avatars or great prophets. All of these capabilities of prescience, of telepathic communication, the transmutation of matter, the defiance of gravity, levitation, all of these things, there's all kinds of capacities that our human family is capable of, which we now know about, that we can share. So we don't have to stand in complete and total awe of another species just because they happen to have several million more years of biological evolution than we do. We know the teleology, we know the trajectory toward which our human family is otherwise naturally evolving. What we have to do is accelerate that and come to understand what the capabilities are of our own human family, so we do not hold ourselves in lower regard than that to which we're entitled. We need to defend our rights and our sense of dignity in the face of a potential challenge like this, but we have to know what the information is in order to do this effectively. That's what's so important about this. And that's why the New Paradigm Institute is here, to try to help craft what this new paradigm is. What are the new worldview? What is the new worldview that we have to all come to understand and share in order to kind of accommodate this new alliance we're going to have with this extraterrestrial civilization, pursuant to which we can protect our fundamental rights and liberties? That's what really has to be done. I believe we can coordinate this across all party lines, all ideological lines, all economic classes, but we need to understand that, there's an elite here that still are operational, and they're going to try to garner control over this for their own personal financial advantage. They've always done that, and we know that, and we have to not allow that to happen. This has to be information and knowledge and technology that is available for everyone, not only everyone in our country, but everyone on our planet. That's what really has to happen here. That's what the New Paradigm Institute is all about. That's why I'm asking people to get in touch with us. newparadigminstitute.org. Become a volunteer, do more than just, learn how to get some information on this so you can, engage in a wiser conversation at cocktail parties. And, this is information that's absolutely essential to the preservation of our republic, the preservation of our democracy, the preservation of our human dignity in the face of the potential engagement with a massive extraterrestrial civilization. This is probably the most important period in our human history, that we've encountered yet. Okay, so we need to mobilize, and we need to do this seriously and responsibly. And that's why we've established the New Paradigm Institute in Washington, D.C.
Danny, I'm wondering if you'll ever get an invite to Harvard Divinity School to discuss this. They kept Emerson away for 30 years after he made certain pronouncements, so maybe you've got a little bit more time to go. Danny's actually going to be joining us for a 4-week seminar series. He'll be one of the speakers and one of the people interacting with our audience. The Evolution of Religion and Spirituality, One Step Beyond. He'll join Leslie Kean and James Tunney and Alan Cohen later this year. You can go to ChristopherNaughton.com for more information. Danny, thank you so much for joining us today again with the Romero Institute, with the New Paradigm Institute.org. Always great speaking with you, Danny. I look forward to our next conversation. For all of us here at New Thinking Aloud, for longtime host Jeffrey Mishlove, co-host Emmy Vadnais, all the great volunteers here at NTA, I'm Christopher Naughton. Thank you, for you, after all, are the reasons that we're here.
Book 3 in the New Thinking Aloud dialogue series is UFOs and UAP, Are We Really Alone? Now available on Amazon.
You can now download a free PDF copy or a beautiful printed copy of issue number 6 of the New Thinking Aloud magazine.